Welcome to the Academic Woman Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, tenured full professor, mom of three, and firm believer that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. In the summer season of the podcast, we're busting the myth of the quote-unquote traditional path through academia by featuring the life stories of diverse academic women who have created success for themselves on their terms. Get ready to get inspired. Let's go. Welcome to an episode that is an interview with one of my favorite humans in the world, Dr. Sandra Soto Santiago. Now, Sandra was not only the very first graduate student that I had the honor to supervise, but she also went on to become my colleague at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez. She has such an amazing story of a first-generation college student and her unique experience with as a member of the very population that she studies, which are youth who have gone back and forth from Puerto Rico to the US. She calls them transnational youth. And she brings such an amazing perspective as an educator, as really a social justice educator. Her work is amazing. Her story is amazing. And like I said, she's one of my favorite humans ever. I hope you enjoy this episode with Sandra Soto Santiago. Okay, yay. I'm so happy that you're here today. Yay. Okay, so tell me or us your name, your pronouns, your field of study, and what you do now.
So my name is Sandra Soto Santiago. My preferred pronoun is she or ella in Spanish. And I have a PhD in language reading and culture. And I'm currently an associate professor at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez campus. So I teach both undergraduate and graduate students in the Department of English here at UPRM.
You're an associate professor. Yay! That's amazing.
Yes, I am.
Okay. I'll stop being giddy. All right. So we're going to start. So this summer season of the podcast, we are talking to lots of different women about their paths through academia. And the idea is that that all paths are legitimate. So it's really a life history project with no IRB. And so whatever you're telling me is not going to be used for research purposes. Okay, so let's start at the beginning of Sandra's life. Tell us what you were like as a kid.
Of course, we had to start there. That's a difficult question, but I'm going to start by saying that I was very focused in school. School was very important to me. And the more I think about it, I feel like it's because that was a place where I had control over my life. I had support. I grew up in a household that was led by a single mother. There's 5 of us in total, so I had 4 other siblings. And my 2 older sisters kind of grew up before we did, and they left the house much earlier than we did. So even though I'm the middle child, I kind of became the older sister. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in an environment with there definitely wasn't a lot of privilege, and my mom had to do a lot for us, right? Mm-hmm. So I always remember, even though there are many parts of my childhood that I don't remember, we moved around a lot, but I always remember there were specific moments in my life where my mom would always just repeat, you have to get an education. You have to be good in school because I can't give you anything else, right? Mm-hmm. And that just kind of worked somehow. So when I was a child, like a young child, mm-hmm. I always felt validated in school by my teachers and school staff. And I was given opportunities to do activities and be part of events and student groups. Mm-hmm. That made me feel like I was a good student. So I always felt like that, and I had good grades. I was a nerd, and I liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when your mom would say you have to get an education, like, did that mean go to college for you? Like, did you translate that into go to college?
At that time, I don't think I did. I'm a first generation college student. My older sister was the first one in my family to go to college. And at that age, I don't remember thinking about what that meant and recognizing what that meant. Now as an adult and with what I've done in my with my career,
Mm-hmm.
I can see it much differently. And I totally understand. I know that her struggles were very different to mine and that her experiences as the first one to go to college, that was difficult for her, but it was absolutely essential for us that she went to college because then that became an option for me. And my mother didn't know how to support us. She just knew that we had to go to school, we had to do well, we had to have opportunities to be able to do what we wanted to do. And she's a very smart woman, but she didn't have the chance to finish high school. She completed a GED as an adult many years after she had us. So that's what she just meant. You need to take advantage of the school. And we're talking about a public school setting in Puerto Rico. Many students go to public school, many others go to private school, but in a place like the US, public school is the school option, right? The main school option. Here in Puerto Rico is a little bit different. And there's always this idea that public school is not quite as good. You know, you go there because you have to, because you can't afford a private school. But private schools, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting a better education, right? So yeah, I think she was just trying to say, take advantage of this, go to school, learn, because I cannot do anything else for you. And she also meant that thinking about our finances and the fact that I needed to somehow figure out what I was going to do with my life and how I was going to pay for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a young woman, right, in high school or whenever the like, when did it occur to you, I'm going to go to college? Like when did you know this is what my step's going to be?
Well, as I was growing up, I always, you know, how they ask children, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always, you know, of course, I wanted to be a teacher and an artist. So that's basically where everybody goes, or at least I did. I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. And I think, again, it was because teachers were such an important part of my life as I was growing up. And so that meant college somehow. But I didn't really start thinking about college seriously and really planning for college until I was basically in high school. And when I was in high school, I was not in Puerto Rico. I was in Pennsylvania. And as we moved to Pennsylvania when I was in seventh grade. Yes, seventh grade. And my life really changed when we moved because I went from, and later we can talk about how that connects to the work I do. But I went from being that child that felt smart, that I felt confident, that felt like my English was at a higher proficiency and I spoke better English than other students, and teachers would ask me if I had lived in the US when I had never done that. I went from being that student to being a student who couldn't put a sentence together in English. And I went from a 4.0 student to a student who was barely, you know, passing her classes and who got a D in a science class. And it was very difficult and challenging because it was frustrating.
Yeah.
And so language had a lot to do with that. And I was placed in the state of Pennsylvania where they called them ESL courses. I was there for a year. And then when I went to high school, I was told that I no longer needed that program. There was nothing they could do for me, anything else. So I went into basically the mainstream classroom, but I was in the regular classroom. And I felt little by little, you know, I felt good. I was getting good grades. And I remember that we started thinking about what we wanted to do. And some of my friends, Latina friends, were going to a school, like they would go to our regular school in the morning, and then in the afternoon, they would go to this institute where they would learn skills for a career. Like if you wanted to be a beautician, if you wanted to be a mechanic, right? And I thought, I want to do that because it's basically like vocational education, right? So I can actually learn how to do something without having to pay for college. And that was part of my plan. My mom didn't like that plan.
Uh-huh.
She wanted something else for me. And so I remember going to my guidance counselor and saying, these are the classes I'm going to take, which was also very different than in Puerto Rico. So this process of going to a guidance counselor and planning I think it was my junior year.
Uh-huh.
And he said, you shouldn't take these classes. You should take AP classes. And I had never taken an advanced placement class. And I was freaking out about that because I didn't feel like I was going to be able to handle those classes. I felt like I was behind and like I was fine where I was, right? Just leave me alone, it's fine. And he just did it. He said, no, you're going to take advanced placement English and I think history or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I started to think about college because my English teacher, Miss Worman, I'll never forget her name. Miss Worman was an amazing woman. And she just somehow guided me through that process. At some point in that semester, she asked me if I was going to take the SATs. I didn't know what the SATs were. We were now reading, Shakespeare and reading full novels. And I was being asked to read in class and she was just completely guiding me through that. And she would even give me a ride after school so that I could go to the SAT reviews that she was offering. And that was when I really started thinking about college and went through the process of applying to college. And I applied. I wanted to be, here we go, a family and consumer sciences teacher, which is home ec. I was going to be a home ec teacher because I love cooking and crafts, and that was my thing.
Right.
And I was so sure of it. So when I took my SATs and when I graduated from high school, that was going to be my major. And I applied to a small private school in Pennsylvania that had a program, a family and consumer sciences program. And then I also applied to a school here in Puerto Rico because my mom, like every year since we moved to Pennsylvania, she would say, we're going back, and whenever she noticed that we were speaking more English than Spanish, she's like, we're definitely going back. But then she actually waited for me to graduate from high school. Mm-hmm. So I decided to apply to one of the private colleges here. And we did move back after I graduated. So that was my process. And when I think back, I definitely, of course, many years later, when I started reading about social reproduction and what it means to be a first generation college student, I could understand that very clearly because they were talking about me. Yeah. And I could very clearly identify the people that made that happen for me or that guided me, because my mom wouldn't have been able to do that with me, even though she wanted me to succeed and to go to college. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you came back to Puerto Rico, you didn't go, well, I know where you graduated from. So how did you, so what was your undergrad experience like? Because in the end, you did not major in home ec. So
that's another story. Okay. So as I said, my life was very complicated as a child. And ever since we moved to Pennsylvania, I really became a main source of support for my mom. I would watch over my siblings. I would cook. I would take care of the house while I studied because my mom oftentimes had two jobs. Mm-hmm. So that was my contribution to the household. And so when we came back, and of course we came back without a solid plan. My mom knew she wanted to come back, so we didn't have a house of our own, a home. We lived with relatives for a while, and I had family here and friends that I had gone to school with when I was in the 7th grade, and they were starting their first year of college. And then my cousin told me, why don't you come to the University of Puerto Rico? Mm-hmm. And when I learned about the University of Puerto Rico and the process of application, I realized I was late. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't just, like in private schools here, I couldn't just say, I want to study I would enroll. You really have to start that process a year before. Again, going back to knowledge about options and about what you need. And so we were at a personal level going through a very difficult situation of figuring out where we're going to live and what was going to happen with us. And my siblings were in school. And my cousin was the one who said, the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez, West, where we are, has an English department. Because then I realized I still wanted to be a teacher, but I maybe wanted to be an English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I always wanted to be also, before thinking about home ec, I wanted to be a Spanish teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But the time that I spent in Pennsylvania, when I came back to Puerto Rico, that was not an option for me. I felt like I had lost too much knowledge and information about Spanish and how Spanish worked and grammar and the structure of the language. And I didn't feel like I would be able to be a Spanish teacher anymore.
Wow.
So I thought, I can do that in English. And so I realized that there was, even though the degree that was offered at UPR Mayagüez was either in literature or linguistics, I could do the teaching certification program.
Yeah.
And so I applied for that. But even though I had taken the SATs, I had to take the College Board, the entrance exam again. I had never taken that test. I only took the SATs when I was in Pennsylvania, and I was not in school. So for a student in school in 11th grade or 12th grade, there's a process. A guidance counselor explains that process. Today in Puerto Rico, the government basically pays for every student in the public school system to take the College Board once. And the reason why that's done, it's because they realize that there is an issue of access. If you have to pay $35, $40 fee to take that exam, chances are you won't. And if you don't, you can't really apply to the university, right? But when I had to take the College Board, we had to pay for it. I don't even know where my mother got the money. I don't remember how that happened. It's just one of those moments in your life where you kind of feel like things just played in your favor. We were talking about it. A neighbor, let me see if I remember this correctly. A neighbor called her sister, and she took us to UPR Arecibo to check out the university. And they told us, you have until, 3 weeks from now to apply to the UPR. And so I applied there. And then I realized I had to take the College Board. Somehow my mom paid for that. She got a ride when we were living in a very rural area. So we never had a car. Another neighbor drove us to Ponce. She dropped me off at a school where I took that exam without reviewing. So for a full year, I was at home. So I was just taking an exam with whatever I remembered from Pennsylvania, not from what I hadn't studied in Puerto Rico for the last 5 years, basically, or 3 years. And so I took it. So when I got that letter of admission, of acceptance to UPRM, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
Because it meant that I had done this. It meant that I had done it on my own. But also that basically that feeling of earning something. And I almost felt like, well, this might be a miracle because I don't even know how I got the scores. But it also, it's one of those moments where I remember, where I really appreciate the sacrifices and efforts of my mom and everyone in the community to support me to do that. And that's how I started at UPRM a year later than I should have. So lucky for me, I was born in September. So you can really, see. And then you realize that doesn't matter at all. That, you move on in life and no one cares that you started college a year later than you should have. But I do remember I still have friends from that cohort and they're a year younger than I am. Or I remember that when I started college, I would oftentimes get the comment of, you're just so mature. You look so mature. You behave in such a mature way. And that, well, I have to, right? I have to grow up at a very young age. And I was a year older than they were. So that's how I started. And I actually chose the literature program instead of the linguistics programs because, get this, I didn't like language or linguistics.
So ironic.
I this is not for me. I'm not into this type of work. I like literature. So I'm going to be a literature major and then I'll certify as an English teacher.
Yeah. And that's what you did, like, right? I mean, you did the literature major, you certified, you did the most, I'm going to say, the best university in Puerto Rico, because really, like, for our listeners who don't know the context of Puerto Rico, we can have arguments about Rio Piedras campus being the best one, but we're going to say on my podcast that Mayagüez campus is the best, and not just in the UPR system, in all of Puerto Rico. So you did it. And then how did you decide what to do next? Because then you did a master's degree. So what was that process like?
Well, I don't quite remember that moment of alignment where I was like, I want to go to grad school. But I do remember that when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I really enjoyed being a literature major. I enjoyed the faculty, the courses. And there were other courses outside of the department where that kind of helped me process this. Like there was a social sciences class with a professor that I absolutely love and respect. And she is, well, I'll say her name is Luisa Rosario Seijo Maldonado. She's iconic here. Yep. She's the person for social justice and community work in Puerto Rico and our campus. And I took a class with her, and the dreaded part of her class was that you had to do this crazy community project and no one wanted to do it. And this professor would force everyone to do it. I did the project, but it was in that class that I realized that I was not I shouldn't have been at this university, that I didn't belong at this university, that I was it was odd, not odd, but that for some reason I was here, but not a lot of people like me were here, even though it was the public university. And I remember in our final presentation, at some moments in my life, we lived in public housing projects or other communities. And my classmates were given a presentation, and they were talking about low-income students and families and people who live in public housing projects. And I just felt like I had to say something, right? And I made a comment. I can't quite remember what it was now, but I did kind of reveal to my class that I was a student who was a product of public education and who had lived in public housing projects and in other communities in Puerto Rico, and that I felt that difference. And I felt that kind of basically discrimination, like my sister had felt it when she went to college, because we felt like we didn't belong, or people thought we didn't belong.
Right.
And the faces of my classmates just looking at me and saying, well, we can't discriminate against Sandra. And that to them meant we're thinking about a profile of a particular group of people. And Sandra belongs to that population, but she doesn't look like she belongs to that population. And that made me realize that not a lot of people like me were at the University of Puerto Rico, right? And so experiences like that and the courses that I was taking in the department made me realize that even though I really enjoyed teaching and that I always saw myself as a teacher in a public school in Puerto Rico, being a college professor would give me power in a good way to really to do other things in the classroom. To make choices, right? To particularly in my teacher prep courses, to make choices about what we talk about, what we read. And that's really when I started thinking, I want to go to grad school because I want to be a college professor so that I can, being a teacher is amazing, but that I can do a bit more than that and kind of contribute in another way also to education in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. And I want to say, and then you did that. And now we're caught up. No, wait, we have to do the whole story. So you decided to do the master's. Did you ever look at like other programs outside of the UPR master's, or were you just like, here I am, I'm doing the next thing, which is a master's?
I didn't.
Master's of, what's our master's program called?
Master of Arts
in English Education.
In English Education. I didn't. It's so odd. When I applied to UPR to the bachelor's degree, I was like, that's my first option. That's what I want to do.
Right.
There we go. And I got it. When I apply, and I don't mean to sound
No.
cocky in any way. It really happened like that. And it scares me sometimes when I think about it, because I didn't have other options.
Right.
When I applied to the master's, I thought I want to do that program. I wanted the program because I knew the faculty, because I already knew the campus. I already had started a relationship with someone here who was still here. And it was one of those situations where I felt like I'll either do this, and if I don't get accepted, then I'll be a teacher and I'll start working. So I was not looking at other programs. And the same thing happened. Well, for my PhD, we can talk about that later, but it was similar. So I applied and I got accepted. I had that opportunity, and I was also chosen to be a teaching assistant. So I also taught, and I was a research assistant for someone called Kathy Maysack. So no, I chose to only apply to what we call the MAEE, the Master of Arts in English Education, and I was accepted into that program.
So, but all the time with the idea, like, I'm going to get a master's, and then my next step is I'm going to get a PhD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the idea. And I initially honestly thought I'm going to get a PhD in literature or something like that. I hadn't yet thought about education as the area of focus for my degree. That happened while I was doing the MAEE. Yeah. And nowadays we have there's more combined degrees, or you go straight to, a degree that's really master's and PhD together. And that's great. But I also feel like the MAEE prepared me so well for what was coming up in my PhD. And I appreciate that. And some people are better off just doing everything together, and some people need something else. So for me, it worked very well. So when I started the MAEE, I, of course, had started taking courses. I was teaching, and then I became a research assistant for a project as well. And one of the first courses that I took, it wasn't in my first semester, but it was one of the first courses I took, was the research methods class, which I actually teach now. And I took that with an amazing professor, Dr. Jocelyn Heliga, who's now my colleague. And I worked very closely with her in a project that we coordinate together, which is the Center for University Access. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. But it's basically a social education, an educational justice project. And something happened in that class, because I had been thinking about myself as a teacher all these years. And I hadn't really thought about research. I hadn't thought about how research aligned with education, with teaching. And I had to do that in that class. And so I already had chosen a mentor, which was Kathy Maysack. She was going to be my mentor and my thesis chair. But it was really with Jocelyn that I started to develop, Dr. Heliga, that I started to develop the idea of my thesis, and that I started to think about life stories and qualitative research. And I remember sitting down, being with her in her office, and talking about what I wanted to do, which was to interview students who were in the basic track of English, to see what moments of their life, what events and experiences in their lives had impacted their current ideas and perceptions on language and language learning in Puerto Rico. And she talked to me about life stories, and she gave me a wonderful book. And she was the one who said, why don't you add someone who has lived in the US, someone who's a returned migrant? And I hadn't thought about that. And doing that really changed my project, because I met with these 4 participants, and I did my life stories, and I was very lucky to learn these methodologies from her, and then to, have your guidance as a mentor. But when I was doing the interviews with the returned migrant student, I kept listening to my story. And that's when I knew I really want to work with returned migrant youth, or transnational youth. That's the term that I use now. But it was so aligned. It was so personal, right? Yeah. And that's when I started to really consider and learn how personal research can be. And that's tricky and that's painful, but it's so essential. It's so important that it is personal and that you care about what you're doing. And so that's when I started thinking that I wanted to focus more really in education rather than in literature. And literature is amazing and lovely and it's great, but that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. So that really shaped the kinds of programs you were looking at for the PhD.
So I met with my advisor, with you. And I narrowed down. At the time, I didn't know about self-advocacy. I didn't know about, as a first generation college student, again, you don't know how to advocate for yourself. How do you sell yourself, right? And how do you do that in a good way? And how do you even think about your self-worth?
Right.
And we're oftentimes think that we have to take what we're given and we have to be grateful for what we're given.
Right.
But it's been quite a journey to understand. And I'm still understand that you don't necessarily have to do that. You're grateful for that, but you have to know what you're worth and you have to be the one that advocates for yourself. Right.
Yeah.
And so I was able to participate in a project that would basically pay for the fees for up to seven applications for minority students for PhDs. And so I was accepted into that program. So I had basically 7 options, and I sat down with you and
I forgot all this. Yes.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago.
I had forgotten all of this as well. But sometimes you go through your computer files or you're going through your books and this is what happened. Kathy Mensack, this is what happened. I made a choice. All right. I was accepted from the 7. I think I was accepted into 3 programs. And I'm not going to say the programs where I didn't get accepted, but I will say that one of those programs where I didn't get accepted called me this was 2008. And they were wondering if my classes here at UPRN were taught in Spanish or English, in an phone interview in English. And they were wondering about, I think they needed something, my transcript or something. Right. And I said, well, do you want me to email that to you, fax it to you? And the person just I could see that they were a little shocked. And they said, oh, well, if that's possible, if you can fax that, if you can email that to me, that would be wonderful. And I thought, yeah, I'll just get on my horse and I'll it for 3 days, And right at that moment, I thought, I don't want to be in that program. A program that thinks that Puerto Rico is a place where I'm living, probably in a hut somewhere or where I don't have internet access. And maybe they weren't trying to be mean. They were just trying to, not infer anything. And so in the end, I had to choose between 2 programs. And one of them was the Language, Reading, and Culture program in the College of Education in Tucson, Arizona. And then the other one. And in the end, it was about, it really became an issue of funding, right? Where can I be sure that I have funding? And a PhD is expensive. And I did not want to be in debt for 50 years of my life. And you start understanding that in this capitalist model, education is a business. Yep. And so I didn't want to earn a degree and be in debt for a long time. And I wanted that possibility. And so I interviewed with both institutions, with both programs. And one of them was offering me a 1-year scholarship, which meant that after that, then I would have to figure out. Right. And oftentimes in these programs, you do, right? You're able to find funding, but it was scary to do that. And we had decided, I had gotten married already. So my husband was going to stay in Puerto Rico because he had a job here and I was going to be there by myself. So I also wanted to make sure that I would be at least financially okay. Right. And then I was, again, with the support of some various people, I was called for a job interview and I didn't know what the job interview was about, but I was in the Skype call all of a sudden and they were asking me about qualitative data analysis. And I thought, oh, I know this. I know how to do this. And so they offered me a job as a research assistant. And in the end, I thought, well, in Tucson, it's not as cold. It's going to be very far away. But I thought about it with you and with other people. And I realized I decided to go to Tucson. And it's just one of those things where you just know. Once you get there, you just know. LRC was an amazing experience and still is. The mentorship, the people, it's just, I know that I wouldn't have gotten that in the other program. Right off the bat, when I was accepted into this program, a professor called me. It was an administrative assistant. It wasn't, the professor picked up the phone, called me. I was working on my thesis, my master's thesis, while he called me, because I needed to graduate.
Yeah.
And you needed to review the chapters.
Yes. I probably was behind.
But he called me and then he said, my name is Luis Mo and I'm from Santurce. Yo soy de la isla, I'm from there. And he talked to me in Spanish and he said that in such a way that it just made me feel like home, like I was like, I'm talking to someone in Tucson, Arizona, and this person is from Puerto Rico and they speak Spanish. And just right from that first day, that he gave my husband his card with his personal number. I talked to the administrative assistant and she was so kind. They did absolutely everything they could to support me, even more so knowing that I was going to be by myself. And that not only includes allocating funding and making sure I was okay, it included picking me up so I could go grocery shopping. It included taking me to the hospital at some point. And that level of support, having that, which I had already had in my MAEE because I had wonderful mentors, most of them, if not all of them, women mentors. It not only supported me, it really taught me about how to be a mentor and how important it is to be a mentor, especially in grad school. So that has a lot to do with what I have chosen to do as a professor in the Department of English and my approach to how I work with students here. But what I wanted to add something before we move on. A couple of years ago, I don't even remember where it is now, but I found in a little notebook with just notes from my MAEE, a little Post-it with your handwriting that that said, Norma Gonzalez, Luis Mo. And I remember that you pulled out that sticky note and said, this is why you want to go to Tucson. And then I found myself in those classes. And then I found myself being Luis Mo's teaching assistant and being Norma Gonzalez's research assistant and just working with amazing scholars, world-renowned scholars that were so kind and that showed me that you do not have to write in a fancy, crazy language that is not accessible. You can sit down and have coffee with your students. This is part of the process, and this is the right way to mentor someone and to guide them. And you can co-author with them, and they're not just little minions that work for you. And it was just a beautiful experience. And then when I found that Post-it, I was like, oh my God, Kathy made that. Because, I have it somewhere because it was so, I'm not going to say that I got lucky. I'm not going to say that it was meant to be. I'm just going to say that life has a funny way of occurring and happening. And you have to trust that and know that somehow it's all going to come together. And when you reflect on that, you realize that it's true and you just kind of go step by step and let things happen.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. It's like a little prophetic Post-it note.
Yeah.
You're on the Post-it note. That's amazing. And I want to just highlight that. And we had, of the different interviews that we've been doing for the summer podcast, there's another one that the person we interviewed was just and I had a great grad school experience. And that meant for me that I have been able to give other students great experiences because I see it and I know what it's like. And I think a lot of times we hear, and a lot of people experience all the horrors of graduate school. And we forget that that other ways are possible. And so that when we go out to be the professor, we need to make sure we're actively creating that other way for students because it's so formative.
No, and that's part of the self-advocacy. And it's tough. And now I'm saying it from really a position of privilege because I am tenured and I graduated and I'm just looking back on it. But you don't have to take the abuse. You don't have to be in a toxic relationship with an advisor. you should be able to make choices that work for you. And that includes the topic of your project. That includes everything that entails your work, because in the end, it's your career that you're building. And anyone who doesn't understand that and who's not willing to do that with you or for you doesn't really, you shouldn't deal with it. You should surround yourself with the people who are there to support you, who understand your work, who are willing to move away, not give you a voice or give you a space, to just move, to let you do what you should be doing, because it's your process. It's your process.
Yeah, no. And that is 100% yes. So you graduated from the University of Arizona at Tucson, and you came back and you got a tenure track job at the place that you did your undergrad and your master's. And I think, like, just to note kind of culturally a little bit of like kind of background about that too, is that I think, at least when I started at University of Puerto Rico in like 2005, like they were still sending people and paying for them to go get their PhDs and come back, because there was this kind of lack of PhDs coming back to Puerto Rico. And that changed completely in the next 10 years. And so by the time that you were like ready to come back, it was a dang competitive, market. And I guess what I want to ask is, what's it like to walk the halls in the place that you were an undergrad and to like literally be teaching in the rooms with the same chairs because the chairs are 25 years old, that you sat in like as an undergrad? What's that like for you? And maybe like, what are you doing now to kind of like make your mark on the university?
Well, at the beginning, it was scary. It was scary because I felt I still suffer from this, and everybody, and I know a lot of the people who are going to listen to this, and you yourself understand that imposter syndrome is real. Yeah. And that when you come from a background like mine, and when you have had the life experiences that I've had, you always feel like that, and you doubt yourself, and you doubt whether you are here because you earned it or someone's helping you. And of course, now I know that no one was helping me. I did it. But that means that there's a huge responsibility on your shoulders, right? That you feel like you really have to prove yourself more than other people, precisely because of that, because you don't want people to think that you're here because, they know you graduated from this university. And so it felt like that for a while. And the first years, I remember this stress because I felt like I needed to be in my office at all times. Like I needed to, the office hours thing, the committee work, basically not saying no to anyone. Yeah. Because you feel like you have to pay back the privilege of having a tenure track job. And I'm saying that as someone who is working at the University of Puerto Rico, and who, as you mentioned, is very privileged to have that job when other colleagues from the same cohort, from the same age, colleagues who are absolutely brilliant and productive and publish books every year, have had to leave or are here as non-tenure faculty, right, with a contract and earning way less than I am. So it's also painful. It's not only, like you acknowledge that I was kind of like the last one to be hired, and that you have a responsibility that comes with that, but also knowing that unfortunately and painfully, other people who are as good as you are don't have that chance. So in that kind of like the negative aspect of it, I do feel like that, and I felt like that. But as time has progressed, I feel like this is the place where I need to be. And I always felt like that. When I was doing my PhD program, there were other classmates and peers who, like me, had moved from their homes or their country to the US to complete a PhD and then go back. Mm-hmm. That was always the idea for me. Actually, I didn't apply to any other, I didn't apply to any other jobs because I didn't want the temptation of getting an offer from a school in the US. I wanted to be here. And if that meant just doing research for a while, being a teacher for a while, whatever it was, I was okay with that, because I was committed to the idea of coming back and using the knowledge that I had earned and using the skills here. Mm-hmm. And that was a very personal decision for me. So when the opportunity of the job came up, I was still writing, and I had to write like crazy because I had to finish. Yep. and that was another moment where, again, I felt very privileged with my mentor, who was Luis Mon. Mm-hmm. I had other committee members, but literally we're talking about a day for a turnaround for a chapter. Wow. And I would just send something out and he would send something back, and that level of commitment. And so throughout these years, this is I just completed my 6th year at UPRM. Mm-hmm. I have become much more involved with the master's degree and with grad students, and I've worked very closely with graduate students in their training and as mentor, and I really take that seriously, because I think we're talking about educators, we're talking about researchers, we're talking about brilliant, absolutely brilliant and outstanding students who just need that. They need the time. And so there are other areas of my career that I'm not going to say have suffered, that I have decided not to focus on as much. Mm-hmm. And part of that is writing. Yeah. But I'm a college professor at the University of Puerto Rico in a location like Puerto Rico has been hit by 2 hurricanes. The PROMESA law established the Fiscal Control Board. The financial crisis has hit every area of the people of Puerto Rico. The University of Puerto Rico is part of that. The students are paying basically twice as much as they were paying 2 years ago. They're paying significant. I mean, to me, it's very difficult to think that I pay $40 per credit at UPRM, and students are now paying over $100. And I know what that means because I went through that. It's infuriating to hear people say, it's fine, it's still accessible because it's cheaper than other institutions. But the reality is that when you really have to choose between eating and paying for books or paying for tuition, it's not accessible. It's not fair. And so I know that even for grad students. So I have chosen to really make sure that they are well informed, that the way in which I design my courses, that what they're reading comes from a perspective that helps them see the world and read the world and understand the world in a different way that maybe they would see it in other courses. So that takes a lot of time, but but it's gratifying, and it's just amazing to get their feedback, to see them graduate and go to grad school themselves, to PhD programs and do amazing things. So that's been a significant part of the work that I'm currently doing here.
Yeah. And I think if you look at, like, when I think about all the students you've mentored and their projects, I'm like, wow. Like, talk about like that idea that you had when you were an undergrad and you thought, if I'm a professor, I can kind of impact things at like a little bit of a more leveraged place, right? Like, as such a young person, to be able to like be able to do that and say like, well, if I was teaching the teachers, well, then there would be, or if I was teaching the people who are going to be professionals in these areas, then I could maybe make a bigger, like a more leveraged change. And you totally see that in the projects that your students are doing. So that is amazing. And I want to talk about, because we could talk about so many things. Yes. And also it's unfair to the listeners because you and I would talk every day, and we have not talked in a long time. Every single day. So, but let's talk about the qua, because when I think about kind of, again, like impactful work, the work that makes absolute and complete sense, like you are the most perfect person to work with those students, not just because of your background, but because of your academic work as well, you know, with transnationalism and just so many different reasons that you're like a great fit for the QA. So for the listeners, and we will link up all the information about the QA, which does take donations. And so we'll link up to that as well. But tell me about the QA. Like, what is it and what's your role in it? And what are they doing? And what are they doing now during the lockdown?
The QA. Okay. So the QA, it stands for Center for University Access. And this is actually a project that started around 2007. When I was a master's student, and I first, this is another way in which you see how your life connects to the work you do. I was taking that research methods class with Dr. Justin Heliga, and one of the guest speakers was Dr. Prima Abruzzi, who's an amazing writer and anthropologist, and just, she can do no wrong with her writing. She's just amazing. And Prima Abruzzi came to our class to talk about this project, the Center for University Access, which had received money from the institution, and they had just received also external funding. And it's a project that focuses on basically educational justice and ensuring that students mainly from public housing projects and other highly impoverished communities I'm talking about the one in Mayagüez, that they have the same opportunities for education, for mentoring, for aspirations, for educational goals than other students. So once you go to college is a must. It is an option. You guide people towards that, because then you just have to go to college. That's not necessarily the case when you're in a family that has it. And just like I shared earlier, the fact that my mom hadn't been to college didn't mean that she didn't want me to go. Right. She didn't know how to do that. She didn't know what that entailed. And so my sister had to go, my older sister, she had to go through a lot to graduate from a bachelor's degree. And then I went through that. I'm the first one in my family to graduate from grad school as well. Mm-hmm. But then my younger sister, she came to college. She studied here as well at UPRM. Then she went to grad school. She completed a PhD in clinical psychology. That's what she does now. And, it's funny because our relationship is, I'm a sister, but I'm also like a mom. And, and she still calls me for things like, I have to write this letter. And she's absolutely brilliant. But there are moments where I can see that the connection between how important it is that I went to grad school to be able to support her in ways that other people maybe can't. And so not everyone has that. Yeah. And what I learned originally in 2007 from Rima is that there are people making choices for our students every day that track them and that make decisions for them. And so the QA is all about ensuring that students have other choices, and that whether or not they decide to go to college is based on them and not on the fact that they didn't know they had to take the college board, or they couldn't make it to that orientation, or their guidance counselor decided you don't get to go to that open house at UPRM. Someone else does because you're not college material, right? Mm-hmm. And so we work with students from 7th grade until high school. And that's our school component. We do both academic support, and we have a mentorship program. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is to support them so that they learn, they have good grades, and that they learn everything that's out there for them so they can make informed choices. And so once they graduate from high school, then they start into our college component, which is geared towards access, retention, admission, and retention. So we also know that it's not only about ensuring that they get to college. Right. Once you get to college, like me, you soon realize I'm not like everyone else. Mm-hmm. I didn't even have that in my math class. I don't know what that professor is talking about. And he or she is just saying that I'm dumb. And that if I can't take the heat, then I need to get out of the kitchen. I shouldn't be here. I should just drop because I am not college material. And that's not the case. The case is that I didn't have the same opportunities. So that's what we do. After Hurricane Maria, things got very complicated. We lost the external funding that we had. And it's been difficult just to kind of keep going. We're that we're open. We're doing the best that we can, but it's difficult to ask for money and donations when you have to choose, where does your money go?
Yeah.
Do I contribute to a family having a roof?
Mm-hmm.
Do I contribute to feeding a child, or do I contribute to a school bus to take these kids to a college to be able to do some tutoring? And it's more than that. But I think what's been amazing about it is the level of commitment. I coordinate this project along with Dr. Jocelyn Heliga. We've been doing that since 2017. Mm-hmm. And it is basically coordinated and spearheaded by students themselves, many who are participants of the project. Mm-hmm. And so there's this beautiful way in which their lives and their experiences are connected. And no one can talk to a 10th grader about college better than a second-year college student who went to that same school, who can talk about the teachers, right? Mm-hmm. And now, because the KWA started around 2007, this is the second year where we have cohorts of students who started KWA in 7th or 8th grade and who are graduating college.
Yeah.
And just seeing that, it's beautiful, right? We know that the most current numbers on poverty in Puerto Rico tell us that basically 60% of minors in Puerto Rico live in poverty. That number has increased significantly with COVID, because during the quarantine, many families, have lost their jobs and the financial situations have changed in the household. So 60%, just the number of 60% is super high. And so what we do is just ensuring that students have the same opportunities. In the last year, we have been offering the tutoring in the schools, and you really get a different appreciation for schools, for public schools in Puerto Rico, when you go to the schools and when the resources and the spaces that they have are available to you. Teachers in Puerto Rico they're just amazing.
Yeah.
So we do have a system to donate through UPRM, and if you can make that link, you can share that would be great. And we always do like to say that when you make a donation to the KWA or to the UPR, you can actually deduct that. It's tax deductible because you're making a donation to a public university. And we use the donations to pay for the transportation. Transportation is key for us because, like I mentioned, many of our participants come from public housing projects and communities that are not necessarily a walking distance to campus. So we pick them up from school and then we take them back to their communities. And so if the tutoring program is done at 5:30, we don't want someone walking for 45 minutes. And we're in the Caribbean, but 5:30 in December, it still gets dark. And there's also, we want students to feel the experience of being in a university setting. We have participants who have shared that they studied in a school that is basically across, a walking distance from our campus. And they walked in front of our campus for years and they never came in because they never felt like they belonged in this place. Mm-hmm. And so it might seem silly to say, oh, you're paying money for transportation, but that means safety for them. And it means that they really get acquainted with the space and they feel what it's like to be in college. And it's also good for the college to know what it feels like to have the students come here. So I don't know if there's anything else that you want me to add about the project. This summer, we unfortunately weren't able to do the summer camp. One of the challenges of working with our students is that they have different access to technology. Their phones and addresses change often. And so keeping track of them, it's challenging. Ever since Hurricane Maria, it feels like, okay, we have a system in place. We have developed something that's working, and then something else happens.
Yeah.
But we're here, and this is a project that I can't walk away from. Many of the things that we do here at UPRM now, if you have external funding, you can buy your time and and be able to do that. But we have to do more and more every day, every semester with less. And it's almost like you have to choose, oh, well, if you want to do all that mentoring, you do it with your time. If you want to run that project, you do it on your time. And that's the problem with thinking about education as a business and thinking about numbers, because you can't tell me, oh, it's just 100 kids. Those 100 kids, those are lives, those are people.
Yeah.
And with my background, I just can't walk away from a project like that. And that's where the commitment comes from for the team as well. These are students who have been part of the project and who know how important it is for them to be there and to contribute somehow.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for telling your story today. I feel like it's like a tip of an iceberg, but that's because I know you. I love the way that like you showed that kind of like really that importance. And it's again, it's so related to your work, right? Those key people in your life and the mentors that you had, and then the way that you are mentoring now, and, not just your grad students, but the QA and everything as well. So, and to go back to the theme of a path, that is different, but legitimate, like as all paths through academia are legitimate. I just really appreciate that we got to hear yours today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I think that if there's one thing you can do or you should do is surround yourself with the right people.
Yes.
And sometimes you're forced to surround yourself with other people as well. But when I have been very, very fortunate to be absolutely surrounded by amazing women and women who have supported me, who show me that I matter, that I'm worth it, and that I don't feel used. And that oftentimes happens in an academic setting.
Yes.
So it's hard to do it, but say no and make sure that when you're saying yes to something that really matters to you, because then it's gonna be worth it, even if you're not getting paid for it or if it's taking longer than you anticipated. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a wonderful step in that journey instead of a pain in the you-know-what.
Yes, absolutely. Such good advice. Well, thank you so much, Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It was great talking to you and sharing a lot of these experiences.
Yes. Yay. Thank you for spending your valuable time investing in yourself and your career by listening to this episode. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join the over 13,000 academic women and non-men folks in the I Should Be Writing Facebook group. Just go to facebook.com/groups/I Should Be Writing or search for I Should Be Writing inside your Facebook app. See you inside.